Welcome to this week's Knowledge Nibble, where we will discuss how to build a horse correctly from the foundations up. With the QuadX strength and conditioning method training well underway, I've taken some information out of that course just to show you the theory behind how we work through the method and how we build horses in the correct way. So just looking at this picture here of this Jenga block, you can see that this is a very unstable foundation. And if we were to build horses in this way, which quite often we do, because what happens is we pull horses out when they're young, we say, right, we're going to break them in, we send them off for 6 weeks to be broken, and within that 6 weeks they come back, they go from being never sat on before to 6 weeks of work, they come back, walk, trot, canter and jumping a fence. That's pretty much sort of normal 6 to 8 weeks of what we do. Now, 6 to 8 weeks mentally might be enough for a lot of horses to be able to take that, start to accept having a rider, go out and see a few things, go hacking, get used to going in the school and doing all these different things. But is that long enough physically to adapt and condition to what the horse is being asked to do? And the answer to that is mostly no. Unless they've had some preparation work, that's a very short period of time to ask an animal to adapt. And then what tends to happen is hopefully they get turned away for a bit, but if they don't, they normally go home, start working. And what happens is the horse's core and the horse's strength is not strong enough yet within that short period of time to do what it's being asked to do. So they carry on doing that, but they develop compensations. And these compensations over time will build and build and build, and eventually we get injury. And what we can see here with this Jenga block, in that sort of, if we think about it in that sort of theory, we don't do the foundations, we don't have the preparation of strength and conditioning right at the bottom here, and then we build on top of that, and eventually this topples over. So just for those of you who are interested in the QuadX strength and conditioning method and would like to do the certificate, we are opening the course again in November, and this will be the first time we will go through a fresh group of students. Currently we're training our students that are on our advanced diploma, and we have students all over the world that are now currently training on this QuadX program to become a coach. But if you'd like to get on that first cohort of the certificate, it opens in November. And if you'd like to do that, please get on the waiting list. There's a link in your email this week for the waiting list. Please get on the waiting list, because next week I will be offering the people that are on the waiting list the very best discount, very best early bird discount. And after that, the early bird discount will open up to everybody, and it will be more expensive. So if you want to get the absolute best deal and you want to make sure 100% that you're on that first cohort of QuadX coaches, then please add your name to the waiting list, and I will let you know immediately you can get that very best early bird deal. Okay, so even if you don't want to do that, no problem. There's lots of good information in here for you. And if you're already doing rehab, this will help support what you're doing and your protocols. So this is the QuadX strength and conditioning matrix. This is our sort of the overall, the bird's eye view of what the QuadX method is. Now, the method is not a set of exercises, but rather a decision-making framework or frameworks, because within the method there are lots of other frameworks to help you make decisions and signpost you towards what the next thing to do is. So this is the bird's eye view, this is the overall matrix, and this just gives you an idea of how we work through the strength and conditioning program to develop horses from the ground up. And to help you to understand how, visually understand how this works, I have aligned it to building a house, which we're going to go through in a moment. You can think about it as building a house, as building those Jenga blocks, or as building a cake, whatever way you want to think about it. But it just helps to visually or to think about it in a different way to help you understand how we're trying to build horses from the ground up. So in our first stage of actual strength and conditioning. So the matrix does include evaluation, which is one of the key, in fact, the most fundamental point of the method, is that all horses must be evaluated very specifically with specific tests to evaluate where they are and what particular weaknesses they have and what particular exercises then need to be given to those horses specifically to address their own individual weaknesses. So the evaluate quadrant is probably the most important fundamental part of the whole method. But then you move on to working through the matrix and building the horse up. Now, our matrix is not linear, so we have 4 quadrants that you can move between, and again, you have lots of decision-making frameworks to help you decide when and where you should move between those. But if we just move through them in a linear fashion, so that you can understand the basics and fundamentals of how this should work. So firstly, we have the Engage Quadrant, and in that quadrant, you can think about this of the foundations of the house. So every horse should be able to do a set of certain tests in order to be stable enough and strong enough to build on that foundation. So this image here is obviously just the foundations of a house. They can't be wobbly. They have to be nice and sure. They're fixed here with metal rods. This has to be nice and firm and secure before you start building on top of it. Because if you just build on a wobbly foundation, everything's going to fall over eventually. And that's obviously not what we want. So every horse should be able to flex and lift the spine and resist extension. In this early stage, when we're looking at static work, we're resisting extension, we're resisting against gravity and the weight of the gut. Later on, that will need to be resisting extension of a rider. But in this early stage, it's just the gravity element. Can they recruit their abdominals? They should be able to recruit their abdominals. Every horse will recruit their abdominals if you put them off balance, but it's to what extent. You need to test to what extent they're doing that, whether they're doing it correctly and whether they're doing it, whether they've got much strength there, motor control. Can they flex their lumbosacral joint? Every horse should be able to do that. They should also be able to lower and extend their head and neck whilst maintaining their balance, which, unbelievably or not, you wouldn't understand that a lot of horses cannot actually do this. So they need to load their forelimbs as a pair and also individually, and you'll often find an asymmetry there. They need to be able to load their hind limbs as a pair and individually in the same way. Now, they need to then also be able to do all of this when they are unbalanced. So if you give them a reason or you promote them being unbalanced, they should also be able to do this, which is another extra challenge on top of that. And then they should be able to also do it on an unstable surface. So once you have all of those elements in place, you have what is a statically quite stable horse. We also need to look at their posture, their muscle balance, and their motor control as well. And then when we move on to the ground floor, so now we've got the foundations in the ground and we want to start building out of the ground. So when we come out of the ground and we start to build the ground floor. So this is when you're moving. So everything that we've just discussed, now you want to take that into movement. So when they're moving over flat level ground, unbelievably, even a lot of horses cannot carry this static posture into just moving on flat level ground. Can they do it when they're moving sideways? Can they do it when they're going backwards? Can they do it on a circle, when they're on a circle free with no hindrance from a rider or any training aids? Can they do this? Can they carry themselves well and maintain their posture on a gradient? Can they manage their posture over obstacles, which is a very key part that we bring in to up the challenge and see how they move over obstacles and in all those different gaits. So all of this can be done in those different gaits as well. So then there's another element to the mobilise quadrant, because then what we need to do is add the first floor. And this is where we add the rider. And the rider is not always balanced and stable. Sometimes they're asymmetrical. Even if they are a good balanced rider, they are still, you can imagine you're still adding quite a change in the balance of the horse by adding a rider. And we have to ask ourselves in this section a lot of questions like, can he still resist extension? And, how does his movement change now? I'm sure this horse could still navigate a set of poles, but how does their movement change in order? What do the compensation patterns do they recruit in order to move over a set of poles with a rider on? And that's very important that we have tests and ways of assessment that we can understand how these animals compensate to see whether they are actually coping with a rider or not. And all of these tests and these elements, they're in different parts. So it may be that a horse has a lot of power and can do certain things, like a common scenario is that a horse can jump a big fence and is jumping big fences, but you ask that horse to do a set of complicated poles, or even not that complicated often, and they fall flat on their face, and that's very common. So just because they can do one element of this doesn't mean they can't do another element. So again, that's where the evaluation comes in and the assessments come in, so that we can work out what they can and can't do and what areas we need to specifically focus on. And then just as the final phase, the develop phase, this is where we're building a lot of skill, or we're adding to the skill, where we're building some advanced power. And this is really where we're looking at the performance element. So you don't need to have a penthouse. You can just have a nice house, and the house does everything. It's got your kitchen, it's got your living room, it's got your bedroom, it's got everything you need. That you can, same with a horse, if it can walk, trot, canter in a nice balanced way without compensating, carry a rider well, jump a set of fences, then you've got yourself a lovely horse there. But if you want to move into this performance element then, and really get them training to do something specific, then we need to be looking at all these advanced skills, and we need to be building as well endurance and fitness in this stage. So this really is the icing on the cake, is the penthouse. And that's really how we work through building a horse from the ground up. And like I say, if we don't have the foundations in place, and if for this cake, we only had a very small cake on the bottom, the cake is going to eventually topple over. And that's obviously not what we want. So that's just an analogy, hopefully a visual analogy, to help you understand how we aim to build a horse from the ground up. Okay, so your actions for this week then, review your rehab protocols, which is always an action when we look at anything like this. So are you using this type of method? Are you using this type of system in your rehab protocols? Or if you're a coach and you're coaching horses, are you using this very specific way of developing horses and developing their strength? And as a second action, if you are interested in potentially training as a coach, then please sign up for that waiting list so you get that very best discount next week. And finally, if you are not signed up to the Knowledge Nibbles and you would like to be, please hop over to our website, animalrehabhealth.academy/knowledge, where you can sign up. See you next week.